These IEMs cost 30 bucks. This DAC costs about twice as much. So if you've got around 90 bucks to spend on better audio, does it actually make sense to spend most of that money on the thing your IEMs plug into rather than the IEMs themselves? I tested the Kiwi Ears Belle IEM straight from a PC and through a Kiwi Ears Allegro DAC to find out. And I ended up finding something that made a much bigger difference than I initially expected. Getting into IEMs gets confusing really fast. You buy something inexpensive like the Belle, plug it into your gaming PC, and then you start hearing that you need a DAC, you need more power, you should be using balanced output, blah blah blah. And suddenly your $30 IEM has an entire audio chain attached to it. So instead of reviewing these as two completely separate products, I think there's a much more useful question here. Does the Belle actually need something like the Allegro? And if you've got extra money to spend, is this where you should spend it? The Belle is about as straightforward as an IEM gets. One 10mm DLC dynamic driver, it's got a removable 2-pin cable, and a really small shell with a metal faceplate. I actually really like the form factor and size of these IEMs because some of the higher end ones get huge once you start packing multiple drivers inside them. And they can start to get bulky, heavy, uncomfortable, you know. The Belle is tiny, it's lightweight, and really easy to wear for long sessions. That's a big strength of it in my opinion. Sound-wise, Kiwi Ears went for a warmer, pretty easy-going tuning. There's a good amount of bass here. It kicks, bass lines and explosions have some actual weight without making it feel like a ridiculous bass head IEM. The trade-off is that it isn't the fastest or most controlled low end I've heard. Once a track gets really busy, some of that warmth can start blending into everything else. The mids are actually one of the better parts of the tuning in my opinion. Vocals stay clear and have a decent amount of body, so they don't end up sounding thin or pushed way behind the bass, you know. The treble is tuned very safely, I'll say. Sometimes a frequency graph can only tell you so much. With a game like Tarkov, I care about whether I can actually place a footstep, tell where a shot came from, you know, separate different sounds when everything's happening at once. The Belle handles basic left to right positioning decently well. Footsteps and directional cues are easy enough to follow, so no complaints on those ends. Where it starts to show its price is depth and layering. When you've got comms, footsteps, gunfire, ambient noise, and other players moving around you, I'll say everything doesn't really have that precise three-dimensional separation that I've heard from more technical IEMs. So I'm not going to call these some secret $30 gaming monster IEMs, but in general, for something that can cover gaming, music, Discord, media, I think it's a really solid starting point. So here we're getting to a big question. Does it actually need a DAC? The Belle is rated at 32 ohms with 103 decibel sensitivity. This isn't an IEM that requires some massive amplifier just to get usable volume, okay? So if you've already got a clean source and you're getting plenty of volume out of your PC, you probably don't need to spend another 60 bucks because somebody on the internet said your IEM isn't being properly powered. Needing more power and having a better audio setup are two completely different things. This is the Kiwi Ears Allegro DAC. First of all, I really love the clean and minimal design, the gunmetal finish, just a very satisfying little device. You get USB-C input, regular 3.5mm output, 4.4mm balanced output, and physical volume controls. Internally, it's using an ESS ES902 8Q2M DAC, and at 32 ohms, you're looking at roughly 70 milliwatts through 3.5mm and 155 through balanced. The Belle doesn't need anywhere near that much power, so that's not really why I'd pair these together. What the Allegro does give me is one known audio source that I can move between different devices, be it a PC, laptop, phone, tablet, Nintendo Switch, Legion Go, Steam Deck, handheld device, whatever it is, without wondering how good the built-in audio is on each device. I'll have a consistent sound no matter what I plug it into. I've also got more headroom if I want to start using an EQ, balanced output if I need it, and enough power available for whatever I decide to plug into it later. So I tested the Belle on two different PCs, one with the ASRock X870E Nova and another with the Asus Prime X870P. I listened to both of them directly from the motherboard audio and then switched over to the Allegro using the same tracks and same game. keeping the volume as close as I could. Overall, the difference was pretty small. On both of these boards, switching to the Allegro didn't suddenly give me dramatically better bass, detail, soundstage, anything like that. If I wasn't actively switching back and forth looking for a difference, I don't think it's something that would immediately jump out at me. All that's to say, modern motherboard audio has gotten pretty good for the most part. On a decent board. The Nova is a higher end board, so I'd expect it to have a good audio codec. The Tough B850 is a mid-range board. It has a pretty good audio codec as well. I think maybe on a very minimal entry-level board, it might be different, but these days I feel like the audio codecs have gotten pretty good on most boards. So the biggest thing I would actually listen for isn't some tiny change in the audio detail, it's noise. So what I do is turn up your volume with nothing playing and just listen. Do you hear any hissing, static, buzzing, or interference that changes when your GPU's under load or when you're moving your mouse, something like that? If you do, that's where a dedicated DAC like the Allegro can make a really noticeable, obvious difference right away. You're taking that analog audio conversion away from the motherboard and giving the IEM a clean external source. And like I said, it's becoming less of a problem on modern motherboards. There are still some cheaper or older boards using basic audio solutions where it can happen. So if your motherboard output is already clean, I mean, maybe don't spend twice as much on a DAC than your IEMs because it's not really going to completely transform the sound. But if you are hearing hissing or interference through that headphone jack, that's a real problem that a DAC can solve. The most interesting result I got out of testing though was what happened when I changed something that actually didn't cost me anything. So I started tuning the Belle with software EQ. I use Equalizer APO, and this made a way bigger difference to me than going from either of these motherboard outputs to the Allegro. Stock, I thought the Belle sounded good for 30 bucks. After spending just a few minutes tuning the sound profile around what I actually wanted, it felt like I was finally hearing what these drivers were capable of. The best analogy I can give is like having a 4K screen but feeding it 480p content. The hardware is capable of doing more. I'm just not taking full advantage of it. And that's what going from the stock tuning to my EQ profile felt like. I could clean up some of that extra warmth, bring forward the frequencies I wanted, and suddenly the presentation felt much more open. Details were easier for me to pick out, different sounds had more room around them. And in games, I could tune the profile specifically around the cues that I actually care about hearing. For gaming, I eased up on the lower end because I want to hear the details. When I was watching movies or music, I like a lot of bass, and on that EQ, I had the lower end up much higher. This made a much more meaningful change to me than just moving that same stock tuning from a motherboard to the Allegro. I think that's something that gets overlooked a lot of times when people are looking at audio gear, and it's something I overlooked myself because I didn't know what to look for or where to look. So before spending another 50 or 60 bucks trying to upgrade the source, try tuning the IEMs you already own. The floor for IEMs these days is really high. So like most $30 to $50 IEMs that I've tested are really good, and you can get better and better from there, but the floor, like I said, is very high. So yeah, software EQ is free, takes only a few minutes to set up, and I've even shared my EQ profiles down here to give you a starting point that you can tweak and adjust as necessary from there. With the Belle, I think listening only to the stock profile leaves a surprising amount of potential left on the table, and using an EQ can just open all that up. Now, given all that, that doesn't make the Allegro DAC pointless. It actually gives the Allegro a different job. So once I'm using EQ, especially if I'm making larger boosts, I'm also reducing my preamp gain to maintain headroom and avoid clipping. So having a clean source with considerably more output available starts becoming useful there. Not because the Belle becomes suddenly difficult to drive, but because I have more room to tune it without worrying about running out of clean volume. So the EQ changes the sound, the DAC gives you a clean foundation and headroom to do it properly. So after using both of these, here's how I'd look at it. If you've got 30 bucks, buy the Belle, plug it into whatever you already have, and before you immediately start shopping for more hardware, go download Equalizer APO, try my presets, seriously. because if your existing source is already clean and has enough volume, tuning the IEM can make a dramatically bigger difference than replacing one competent DAC with another. If you've got more money to spend and your only goal is making the biggest improvement to sound quality, then I'd still upgrade the IEM before spending a bunch of money on the source. That's where you're generally going to make the larger jump. If you're someone like me who has a lot of IEMs and you're switching between multiple computers and devices, using EQ, you want balanced output, or you just want one clean source that can stay with you as your audio setup starts to grow, I think the Allegro starts to make more sense. The Belle IEMs don't really need the Allegro, and the Allegro isn't some magic box that unlocks the Belle. What it does is give you a clean, consistent foundation with enough headroom to actually start experimenting with things like EQ. For me, that's where I found the biggest improvement. Not by spending more money, but just spending a little time. So that's all I got for this one. This is what I found through testing. I hope it was helpful for you in some way. Speaking of getting more out of an IEM, the next one I'm testing is the Kiwi Ears Ether. This is going to be a more premium offering from Kiwi Ears, and I'm excited to see how they compare against other high-end IEMs I've tested here, like the Crinier Daybreaks or the Tipsy M3s. So if you're interested in seeing that, stay tuned. It will be out soon. And as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.